Chapter 8: Bias in the Curriculum and in the Classroom. A teacher cannot build a community of learners unless the voices and lives of the students are an integral part of the curriculum. Bob Peterson. The impact of social and racial attitudes. Most teachers begin with their own cultural perspectives and their own unexamined classroom experiences. They often fondly remember their years as students and seek to consciously and unconsciously reproduce those classrooms. Unfortunately, such models are more often than not culturally white and middle class. The bottom line is that we still do not know how to populate the teaching profession with excellent, culturally responsive educators, for racial, ethnic, and cultural attitudes and beliefs are always present, often problematic and profoundly significant in shaping teaching concepts and actions. Teacher expectations affect student learning. A vast body of research in social psychology shows how attitudes can unconsciously affect behavior. Teachers were told at the beginning of the school year that half the students in their class were high performers and the other half were low performers. In actuality, there was no difference between the students. However, by the end of the year, there were significant differences in how the two groups performed. What the teachers and psychology students believed and expected was translated into differential behavior, which in turn became what is called self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, what we believe shapes the way we treat students. Below and beyond teaching expectations is a fundamental and often unconscious bias. Teachers lower their expectations of students because they do not recognize the brilliance students possess, especially when students express themselves, evaluate a problem, or address a situation in a way unlike the teacher. Teachers' decisions to lower their expectations are made visible through all forms of explicit, implicit, and null curriculum. Cultural aspects of curriculum delivery. Some aspects of the teaching process limit its relevance to students of color. Many of these relate to the fact that current pedagogies and practices are often defined in terms of dominant European cultural values and norms, and limit the ability of teachers to address and serve the needs of non-white populations. Parents socialize children into different cultures. In a black working class neighborhood, children were taught to tell rich, creative, embellished stories with many gestures. In a white working class community, the emphasis was on stories that were as accurate as possible, with easy to discern correct answers. Teachers tend to value students who tell stories the same way they do, and they negatively judge students whose styles are different as not up to my standard because of, for example, creativity over accuracy. One way to overcome our own assumptions on style is to take the time to study the communities and the students we teach. If you do not think through how you interact, then you will probably assume your prior embedded style of communication. Bias in conceptualizing ethnic populations. Western science has a long history of portraying ethnic populations as biologically inferior. One can trace what Su and Su called the genetic deficiency model of racial minorities into the present, carried on by research psychologists. These models took two forms: cultural deprivation and cultural disadvantage. Disadvantage, as supposed improvement over the term deprived, implies that although ethnic group members do possess culture, that culture had become deficient and distorted from the ravage as racism. Due to the overlap of socioeconomic status and race, some groups are on average deprived in many ways, beyond the efforts of the group to improve. Bias in assessment. In no other area of education has there been more concern about cultural bias than in testing. This is because people of color have for many years watched their children being placed in remedial classrooms or tracked as having special needs on their basis of IQ tests. A number of factors can contribute to cultural bias in testing. Test items and procedures may reflect dominant cultural values. A test may simply be more attuned to those with more mobility or more money. The achievement gap is known among students, and this knowledge may lead to test results comprised by physical and cognitive factors brought about by the threat of reinforcing the stereotype. For whatever the reason for the test score gap, another factor is almost always overlooked in regards to the size and significance of the gap. Most people assume that the statistical gap is in scores between persons of color and whites is enormous. It is not. Depending on the test, the difference varies but hovers in the range of 10%. The test construction, the test preparation, and the testing situations may all be problematic. A test may not have been standardized on populations of color, only on middle-class whites. Language differences and unfamiliarity or discomfort with students' culture can cause a tester to misjudge them or be unable to establish rapport in group and individual testing situations. Bias in literature. As a bias for curriculum reform, teachers can bring a dissenting eye to children's literature and textbooks. Do readers add brown-skinned white at the core character, or do they transfer the curriculum to enable students to view concepts, issues, events, and themes from the perspectives of diverse racial and cultural groups? Even harder to discern as problematic are inappropriate language choices. Overemphasis on compound words, romantic sounding metaphors, and the stilted speech pattern that they called early jawbreaker were rampant. Bias in textbooks. The following 7 criteria developed by a classroom teacher provide a check on multicultural sensitivity in both literature and textbooks. Are the authors members of different cultures? Check pictures if they're available. Does the preface make reference to multiculturalism or diversity? Do the illustrations, photographs, and drawings show more than one cultural group? Do written examples, problems, or samples draw from more than one culture? Is any reference made to help include speakers of languages currently learning English? Are historical references to other cultures accurate? Do multicultural references emphasize individuals rather than stereotypes? Curriculum reform. Head knowledge without heart empathy will lead to superficial curriculum adjustments. Once we address underlying attitudes and assumptions, we can begin to address curriculum reform that will lead to good teaching for all children. A key to developing heart empathy is to reprogram our comprehension, our head knowledge at deeper levels. The contributions approach involves merely adding the discrete items of cultural to the existing curriculum. Examples include heroes, holidays, food, and other discrete cultural facts without any basic conceptual change in the material, sometimes called tacos and teepees. The additive approach involves adding content, concepts, and themes and perspectives to the curriculum, again without changing its basic structure. The transformational approach occurs when the structure of the curriculum is changed to enable students to view concepts, issues, events, and themes from the perspectives of the diverse racial and cultural groups. The social action approach encourages students to make decisions on important social issues and take action to help solve them. Aspects of curriculum transformation. We are only now beginning to discover some of the pedagogical techniques most likely to lead to successful curriculum transformation, that is, movement into Banks' final 2 level of curriculum change. Too often, teachers bring their students to only limited knowing of superficial understanding of many things without letting them fully experience and know viscerally the heart of what they are learning. Child-centeredness of the curriculum. Child-centeredness, especially with difficult-to-reach students, is surprisingly effective for engaging students. Where possible, begin all curriculum development, especially that related to transformation, with a thorough understanding of the student's perspective, their questions, current level of knowledge and understanding, and inner images. It is critical for teachers to be able to see the material from students' viewpoints rather than just from their own. Make sure to focus on context-rich material that relates directly to students' life experiences. The essence of curriculum reform is that students and their needs are central to the curriculum, not the material to be covered. It is not your child does not fit my curriculum, or I teach your child through my curriculum. The child is the center, not the lesson or the curriculum. The opportunity gap. Even in well-integrated schools, many students of color are tracked into courses that do not prepare them well for either testing or college. This tracking takes various forms, and all of them may be addressed in some manner. Tracking may be by choice, wanting to be with friends who are also not in these classes. Sometimes well-meaning counselors may not be conscious of their limiting advice, and sometimes those around them in homes, communities, and schools may not fully recognize the need for rigorous classes for preparing for college admissions and success. Again, we see the opportunity gap, not the achievement gap, in play. Social action at work. Teachers may choose to look beyond the obvious, to address real needs in a relevant and timely manner. They may teach students to look outside the narrow confines of the given for a larger view that includes more factors, more perspectives, and alternate solutions. Teachers may begin the transformation process by helping students look for items that need action. They may then lead students to see the issue from multiple perspectives. From there, ties to curriculum items and multiple subjects areas may be made. Connections and reflections, emerging views. Before talking with each other, imagine that you are preparing your room for the first days of school. Carefully consider each poster, list, and visual you might put on the walls. Discuss among yourselves some of the considerations and how material in this chapter may influence your choices. What cultural ways of knowing are revealed in your choices? What cultures are represented by the designs or even colors you choose? Would you consider an approach by some teachers to leave the walls completely empty until your students have arrived and the choices are made mutual agreement? My lingering question I leave with you is, how will you make sure to include but not have too much cultural learning strategies in your classroom? What types of books, movies, or even posters will you hang on the wall that you think will be appropriate? Or how will you go about making sure your students are okay with all the ways you've already set up your classroom?